Over the past several seasons, we've told the stories of children who couldn't read and the families and teachers who tried to help them inside systems that weren't built to succeed. We listened to the pain, we traced the history, we followed the science, and one truth kept rising to the surface. This is not a mystery, and it's no longer a debate. Reading failure harms children first, but responsibility does not stop there. In Season 4 of My Child Can't Read, A Heartland Crisis, we widen the lens to examine the state of literacy in Kansas and across America. This season begins with harm, the lived reality of children and families, and follows it upward through classrooms, policy, and institutions. Because when the evidence is clear, when solutions are proven, neutrality disappears. This is a season about what happens next, about the difference between knowing what works and taking responsibility for it. Welcome to Season 4, The State of Literacy. Throughout this episode, you'll hear from a variety of parents, former students, and clinicians. Some voices may sound familiar if you followed this podcast before. Others are new. Their stories, told in their words, show the real cost of reading failure. All names and details are listed in the show notes. Today we focus on the children and families, the most harmed, least responsible. We're not starting with policy, programs, or debate. We're starting with harm. The cost of silence. Imagine a child sitting in a class, trying to be invisible, shrinking into their desk, hoping no one will notice. This is Charlie's story.
I remember there was one time he came home and he was just talking, and he didn't talk a whole lot when he came home from school. He was usually, once he got to middle school, when he was little, he was running around the house like a chicken with his head cut off because he had to sit still all day, and so he was crazy in the afternoons.
Yeah.
But one time he actually opened up and was like, so I try to make myself as small as possible in school. So I'll pull my hoodie up and I'll sink down in my chair and try to get like as close to the desktop as possible so I don't get called on. And that just broke my heart as a parent to hear your child saying that he just doesn't want to be seen in school. I also remember one day he absolutely had a panic attack before school, begging me that he could stay home because he just knew he was going to have to read aloud in science class. He is calling himself stupid all the time, no matter what we say, to convince him that he's not.
This is not about laziness or defiance. This is about fear, confusion, and the emotional toll of struggling to do something most children can do effortlessly.
Our son was the easiest child. I did not have to baby-proof my house.
Wow.
He was potty training. It was a non-event. Everything. He was just really well-behaved, sweet, pretty quiet. So he didn't exhibit any kind of acting out that sometimes that can be it. ADHD can be high co-occurrence with dyslexia. But what we did notice was that he would have these mysterious tummy aches, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. He just generally, didn't want to go to school, and that would have been maybe first, second grade or so. I think the phantom tummy aches, and then even though he was getting straight A's in primary school, there was still something going on that he had diminished self-worth that was going on in his head, and there was something going on that his teacher recognized, that even though he's getting high marks, there's something going on that he doesn't feel good about.
The emotional cost runs deep, and without intervention, it shapes identity.
She unabashedly says dyslexia is her superpower. She is kind and empathetic, and she's a people person, and she can have a conversation with anybody, and she listens intently and with her whole heart. And so it was interesting because the feedback that I was getting before she started school is like, your kid is like, she's really, really smart. Like, she's amazing, and she makes these complex connections, and she's asking me follow-up questions, and like, I'm just trying to fix this fence. And, you know, this was a specific conversation that my daughter had with a farmer where he was cutting pieces of wood. And he was like, I'm fixing my fence. And she's like, what do you have in your fence? What kind of animals do you have? And he was like, oh, yeah, we have cows, you know? And so she's having this whole like agro-business conversation, asking him really, do you sell your cow? Like, where, you know, what breed are they? Because that's how her brain works. And then to recognize like the feedback that we were then getting from teachers, because she was a different person, she shut down, was, I think there's something wrong. Like, I don't know what it is. We're going to wait. Maybe she should go back. And so it's this duality of what dyslexia is. And I will say, one of the things that was so incredible to like move us to action is we read the book Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. So that does an incredible job of talking about how the brain is wired to learn to read, which is not a natural process.
That's the tension so many families live in. Brilliance on one side, shutdown on the other. Dyslexia isn't a lack of intelligence. It's a difference in how the brain processes language. And when that difference is understood, when instruction aligns with how the brain actually learns to read, something shifts. Listen to what changed for her daughter.
My daughter got to choose when she read out loud. That was very important. It was tough to get our school to follow that IEP. But once we had that there, they would send home readings, and she volunteered to read all the time.
Wow.
For a parent, I mean, she was so enthusiastic about the skills she was developing, and she knew, like, yeah, I'm not going to be reading like everybody else, but I can read, and I want to practice, and I'm going to have these opportunities to do it. I will say, like, I had to fight the natural urge to want to save and to want to rescue and to want to tell her not to do that, because again, you're reading. She was reading painfully slow, but she was so excited about it. And it's like, that's what we want to know, is when our kids are getting that effective instruction, it doesn't matter how slow they're progressing, they are getting it and they're excited about it. There's this idea of, we've got teachers who are so enthusiastic about education, and they want to do these cutesy things to capture the kids' attention. The most wonderful thing you can do for these kids is to teach them with structured literacy. They think it's awesome. The games, when they understand what we're doing, when we're segmenting and blending in phonics, they think it's awesome.
Identity, school, and the cost of misunderstanding. Students experience the impact of reading failure deeply. It touches their sense of intelligence, their self-worth, and even their place in the classroom. Charlie Beck, now a high school senior. Would you like to share a little bit of your side of the story in terms of what has school been like for you?
Boring.
Did you get anything out of it?
No.
No. What did it teach you about socializing with other children?
It's better not to do it.
But did you like going to school?
No.
Can you tell me what you would do to avoid going to school?
Act like I'm sick.
Peyton Simons, now a speech and language pathologist.
So I'm a triplet, and so I have a brother and a sister.
Okay.
And in elementary school, my parents would read to us all at night. They would do the right things that the teachers would tell them to do. And then I got put in the lower reading group, and my brother and sister were in the higher reading group, about third grade. I obviously knew that something wasn't right because my siblings were in a different reading group. So that made me feel really sad.
Cooper Phillips, now Senior Director of Product Management.
Looking back, I think it was less about physical illness and more about the emotional toll, primarily guilt. I genuinely believed that my struggles with reading and my inability to distinguish letters were somehow my fault. At that age, you don't really understand the science or biology behind learning differences. All you know is that something that seems so easy for everyone around you feels impossible to you. And that can be pretty heavy on a kid.
Milo Swanson, now 6th grader.
Before I had dyslexia, diagnosed with dyslexia, I thought everything was normal. I just thought I didn't really know anything, and I was in a deep depression. I thought everyone was smarter than me. I didn't really know what was going on. I felt bad for my teachers, how I was doing, and I just keep thinking, am I just a troublemaker? Do I just not listen? What is happening? I felt that a lot. A lot of times I would feel, wait, why do I not know this answer? And then when I think of something, boom, somebody already raises their hand and then they say it. I feel a little bad. I just thought everyone was better than me. I didn't feel special.
For some children, the message isn't loud criticism. It's quiet invisibility. Hadley Swanson asked for help repeatedly, and she was ignored.
I think I was actually well behaved. I was really kind. I was super nice. I was really a really good student. I just didn't think they liked me for some reason. I wasn't outgoing.
Did you ask for help a lot?
They would just ignore me. I thought it was normal, so I didn't really do anything.
When effort is misread as laziness, the damage compounds. Listen to Emmy Johnston, now a reading instructor and literacy advocate, describe what teachers saw and what was actually happening inside.
So I know my mom got emails, especially in middle school, like, we don't know what to do with her. Like, she's just lazy. She just doesn't care. Yeah, I was called lazy many times. I was misunderstood. I felt stupid. I felt like I could do nothing. Like I was never going to succeed. And that was really hard for me because my mom and my dad are really hardworking people and they're really successful. And so are all my sisters. They all have their own little things that they're great at. And I just felt like I was never going to be as accomplished as them. So then it ended up taking a toll on more than just my education. And that was what really affected me the most in the classroom, was just that voice in the back of my head saying, you will never be enough.
I thought my teachers were like, okay, bro, why can you not do like the other kids? So I felt bad, and I just keep hiding it in, thinking it's normal.
What children like Milo need most isn't pity. It's language. Language to understand that different does not mean less.
Every kid has different smarts and different abilities. We all have different smarts. I have dyslexic, designer abilities. Most with these superpowers, they can have abilities that can change their lives. One of the famous builders that created this school was diagnosed with dyslexia. The person, Walt Disney, that made Disney was diagnosed with dyslexia. He said he was gonna make something that we've never seen. Every dyslexic person is so cool.
And when instruction changes, when children are explicitly taught how the code works, something else changes too. Listen to structured literacy teacher Michelle Schmidt share what happens next.
And it's fun to listen to, the teachers come that have my kids and, tell me the little stories about what they're doing in class. It's just been amazing. The difference, the confidence that they have. And kids are reading in class that would never read in class before. Mm-hmm. One of my kids, my middle school kids, I had him in fact, I started tutoring him when he was in first grade, the summer after his first grade year. Then I had him in class. At the ball game, they always read the Keisha rules ahead of time. And the coach had asked one of the boys if they would read it to the crowd. And one of the boys declined. And my student says, I'll do it. And he read in front of the whole crowd. She rules.
That's so much confidence.
Yeah, that's one thing I see in these kids. They're confident. They're learning to advocate for themselves.
Oh, good.
You know, they know their strengths. They know what I'm weak in. Okay, this is what you do.
Without explanation, validation, or acknowledgement, children internalize failure and their self-concept is profoundly harmed. The clinical reality and systemic failure. By the time children reach clinical evaluation, much of the damage has already occurred. Dr. Janelle Tiedemann, a clinical psychologist, sees the downstream impact every day.
The earlier we identify it, the earlier the appropriate research-based reading practices, multisensory, can be implemented to help lessen the burden of reading. We can also help the child receive accommodations that will improve classroom performance and improve self-esteem. If we don't, the child suffers. I have evaluated hundreds, if not thousands, of students suffering from dyslexia who could have had help back in the early years before they became distraught and felt hopeless, before they felt like failures and had developed low self-esteem, and before they were significantly behind grade level due to lack of intervention and the right kind of intervention.
The brain is most malleable in the earliest years. When we wait until 3rd grade to intervene, we're asking children to work against their own wiring. Now let's hear what retired psychologist Dr. Stone has to say.
Now, in a practical sense, like in the classroom, and we've got a child who is very dyslexic, their strengths and weaknesses are very far apart from one another. What are maybe some signs that they see in comparing themselves to other people? What are things that they're noticing?
Well, they can find things they're good at, though school is not usually good at focusing on those. Well, the bright dyslexic kid will tend to have very good spatial memory. So they take for granted the things they do well because they assume everybody can do that. And then the things that are hard for them, they judge themselves because school tends to focus on those areas. And they just think I'm not as good as everybody else, even though they can think in ways that others cannot. School kind of refocuses their self-concept into the weak area. And the human brain is kind of primed to remember the negatives. And so the negatives stick with you. And hence, that's why kids will remember the exact moment in kindergarten or 1st grade when they realized they couldn't read as easily as everybody else.
For some children, that moment never really leaves them. And for many, the harm doesn't end in childhood.
I had a 54-year-old woman come to me about a year ago wanting to be evaluated for dyslexia. She told me that she had always struggled in school with reading and spelling comprehension, and she knew that something was terribly wrong. However, 45 years ago, she was overlooked due to lack of awareness, oversight, or a combination. When I was reviewing results and pointing her strengths, very bright, high visual spatial and complex problem solving, and her weaknesses, fluency, spelling, language simple processing, she began to break down. She told me that she was so relieved to find out what she knew was a problem for her. She was so relieved to find out that she was not dumb and not a failure. She said, "I wish I would have known this information years ago. It would have saved me a lot of heartache."
Delayed identification doesn't just happen by accident. It happens through process, through misunderstanding, and sometimes through resistance. Dr. Janelle Tiedemann explains what parents are legally entitled to do and where breakdowns often occur.
This is a diagnostic evaluation.
So it's a doctor.
Right. So we're not assessing, we're evaluating, we're using standardized testing to determine the strengths and weaknesses and identify if there's dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And this would be the official note to a school district to let them know your child has dyslexia, right? Done by a psychologist.
Yes. And I will have the diagnoses listed there. So
along those lines, I've had a couple parents ask me, is it legally okay to ask a school to have their child tested for dyslexia?
they have every right to ask the school to evaluate their child. Okay, that is open to every parent. There may be some resistance or backlash depending on the school and how many children they have on IEPs and all those kinds of things. By law, the school has 60 school days to evaluate a child. The other thing, though, is there's a consent to evaluate form to be signed, but they have 60 school days. And I have heard from some parents, some school districts that have not abided by that. Another part of the problem is that not everyone knows how to diagnose dyslexia.
This is not about blame for families or children. They are the receivers of systemic failure. Responsibility flows upward to teachers, administrators, and policymakers. Awareness is the first step. Observing harm is no longer neutral. The tragedy is this: reading is not mysterious. It's teachable.
When you teach kids the mechanics of reading, when you teach them that the letter represents this particular sound, and you get two or three sounds together, and then you show them how to decode those letters into sounds, and then to synthesize or blend them into words, and you use words that you know is in their vocabulary, then they learn how to read.
Call to action. Parents and advocates, speak the truth of what reading failure looks like at home and in the classroom. Document it. Share it. Your acknowledgement matters. Teachers, see where harm shows up in your students' daily lives. Record it, share it, connect observation to actionable solutions. And policymakers, listen to evidence from the ground up. Understand that inaction is a choice that perpetuates suffering. Responsibility begins with awareness.
At Phillips Fundamental Learning Center, we meet a lot of families who say, something just feels off, but I don't know what it is. So if you're wondering about your child's literacy development, you're not alone. Here are some signs that might point to early dyslexia or neurodivergence. Does your child mix up sounds like saying aminal for animal? Struggle with fine motor skills like using crayons or a fork? Confuse directions like up and down, left and right? Have trouble following multi-step instructions? Struggles with rhythm, skipping or reciting songs? Gets frequent ear infections? Writes their name but can't identify the letters? Well, if 6 or more of these sound familiar, your child may be at risk for dyslexia. And that's exactly why we're here. I'm one of the assessors at Phillips, and when you come in, you'll be met with care, not judgment. We'll guide you through a gentle, developmentally appropriate assessment, and together, we'll uncover what's really going on. After the assessment, we create a personalized path forward, tailored to your child's unique needs. That may include free trainings just for parents, a look at our specialized school, a list of trusted, trained literacy specialists, or even professional development for your child's current teacher. But you shouldn't have to figure this out alone. Let's take the next step together. Call 316-684-7323 or visit funlearn.org today to schedule your child's assessment. We're here when you're ready.
The children and families you heard today are real. Their stories are not isolated. As this season unfolds, we will move upward into classrooms, teacher preparation, policy, and infrastructure, always keeping in view the cost borne by those least responsible. Subscribe now so you don't miss episode 2, The Adults in the Middle. Thanks for listening to My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis. If this episode resonated with you, If you saw your child, your classroom, or your community in these stories, you're not alone. Now is the time to act. Every child can learn to read, and we all share responsibility to make it happen. I invite you to take action today by subscribing to catch every episode, rating and reviewing to help others find this series, sharing your story and learning how the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center is changing lives at funlearn.org/podcast. And by sharing this show with a friend, teacher, or parent who needs to hear it. All resources, source credits, and tools mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. Together, we can take responsibility and rewrite the story of literacy. One child, one classroom, and one school at a time right here in the Heartland.